Welcome to Diet Rebellion, the podcast that's here to help you break free from the chains of dieting and finally take control of your health, strength, and confidence. I'm Joe Hoye, your host and the founder of Diet Detox. After transforming the lives of thousands of women over 40 who have been trapped in the endless diet cycle, I'm here to show you a new way. One that focuses on eating for your body's needs, restoring your metabolism, and rebuilding your strength for life. Get ready for real, no bullshit conversations, expert insights, and actionable strategies that empower you to live diet-free and thrive. It's time to stop restricting and start rebuilding. Join the rebellion. Your journey starts now. Michelle Aspinwall is a medical intuitive and the body whisperer, channeling for her clients' health results. Using both science and spirit to lead, heal, and shift women's health, especially beyond 40, Michelle works with women worldwide to cultivate their expansive energy with their biological functions, going well beyond the typical allopathic model. How a woman thinks, believes, supports, and nourishes her vessel activates her to be the most magnetic and vibrant being for the entirety of her life. This episode is packed with topics we've never discussed on the show, and even more that we may have brushed on but never dove deep on until now. So enjoy today's show. Michelle, this is going to be a really fun episode of, I think a lot of it is going to be on things we haven't talked about yet on the show, but it is absolutely going to tie into exactly what we do at Hoye Fit and what our overall goal is. Michelle, welcome on. How are you?
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. This is my first conversation with a man other than my husband on menopause, so I'm very excited for this.
I'm happy to have you. Awesome. So in the intro, everybody learned a little bit about you, but can you tell me more about two things? Because the two things I know about you is that number one, you're a medical intuitive, and number two, you're a body whisperer. What are those?
So the medical intuitive is kind of the blanket, it's like the umbrella description that I use because generally most people will be like, oh, interesting. And in some kind of odd way, it legitimizes a little bit better what I do in the sense that if I tell people I can read your body, I can look at your face and I can read your body and read your energy, that feels a little invasive. It can feel a little invasive to some people. And then some people will sort of say silly things and, ask me to perform like a circus monkey. And that doesn't really go over well either. So I feel like it legitimizes and at the same time creates a standard of like, this is what I do and it's legit and real. So that's one aspect. And then the other aspect is, body whisper is how I've been described. It's because part of the process of my work is not only combining the science of the physiology of how a woman's body, traditionally a woman, because I work mainly with women, but how a woman's body functions. Because some women, the way into their body is to actually physiologically understand it. And then for other women, it's actually the antithesis of that. It's really more about why do I have certain sensations and why does that elicit certain emotional or mental responses? And that's where, the invitation to go deeper and really talk about the spirit that runs through the body, which I'm sure you've had experience with working with musculature and connective tissue and bones and things like that. I mean, we have spirit living and running through us. We have ancestors embedded in how we move. And it's so fascinating when you really start combining like the physics of how we move with the physiology of how we were created, how we kind of function.
Yeah, I love that. And so just taking a really fast scroll through your social media, we can see ties into exactly what you just said, and not just into women, but into women in menopause, in that stage of their life. So I'm curious, is there a reason that this is more important in that stage of life?
What I want to tell you is that currently, as we're recording this, I'm 52 years old. I am technically postmenopausal woman. So I have transitioned through not only perimenopause, which is in my world, the 8 to 10 years leading up to the menopausal transition, but I now no longer have a cycle and I've had my menopausal party days. So I've gone through that 12 months of not having a cycle and now I have no cycle and my hormones are very distinctly at a level that creates a certain dynamic within me, not only within me, but in my perception of what my body feels like post, the estrogen surge that we think of as, women who are able to grow and sustain life, to conceive. And so the reason that the reason I find this so interesting, this particular stage of life, like I really love working with women in the 45 to 55 range. But what I have found as a postmenopausal woman is when you walk through the cage of estrogen, what I call the cage of estrogen, estrogen is this phenomenal hormone that we have. Obviously, it's made, there's a cascade and a hierarchy of hormones, but estrogen being made from testosterone has this really powerful effect on women. It's what makes women women. It's what affords us the ability to do and be and have and feed the way that we do our offspring. But even greater than that is what estrogen does is it keeps us very focused. It keeps us very centered, and it keeps us very connected to now, of course, I'm generalizing, so I just cut myself off. I'm generalizing a little bit here from, obviously, this is my own perspective, but also the perspective of the demographic of women that I tend to work with. So whether you're a woman who's had children, decided to have children or not, whether you're a woman that's tried to have children and been able to or not been able to, that's really has nothing to do with this. It's really more about what hormones are made to do. And that is they're made to connect to certain cells and have certain aspects. They tell those cells what to do. So the interesting thing about estrogen is that it keeps us very focused on the family, on caring for the family, of being very connected to the unit of family, whatever that looks like. And when we transition through perimenopause, what happens is estrogen is really going up and down. And then as the ovaries begin to quiet, as they begin to settle, this is all, of course, my language. So the ovaries begin to settle and quiet, the estrogen starts to really change in its form, and we start to have less of it. This is all things we all know. What I have noticed, and through my own transition, is I actually walked out of the cage. And it's to some extent, it's a self-imposed, it's a physiological cage. But what was really interesting about walking through the cage is I had to not only become more familiar with what it felt like to not have those hormones at those levels coursing through me all the time. So it changed my perspective. It changed the way that I related to people, to circumstances, to myself, to my own body, to my partner, not so much to my children. I will say that because they're still at home. I have 2 teenage boys that live at home. But the interesting thing is when I really kind of walked through this cage, what was really powerful for me was what I was meant to do without all of those hormones coursing through. It really changed my perspective on not only this particular season of life, but on who I am as an individual. And I think for women, who we are as an individual post cyclical, menstruating life, it is for some women, it is deafening. Feels as though we're crashing. It feels as though, who are we? These are all things that I've heard, that I'm unraveling something. And I think what's really lost in the current narrative, especially online, with, doctors really branding themselves as having a voice and having a very distinct opinion, which I think there's room for everyone, right? I believe that people are doing the best they can with the information and experience they've had. But what I find as a more interesting conversation is, who are we and what do we do when our ovaries, by the way, biologically, we're wired this way, when our ovaries quiet down and other aspects of us become more sensitive or more awake, you can fill in whatever word you want to use. But I have found that I actually question if really the best thing for all of us is to be supplementing with a lot of hormones, and also the quantity that we're supplementing with. Obviously there are benefits to that, and scientifically, I think we're really entering into this beautiful renaissance for women's health. But I also really want to say that on the flip side of that, not everyone's body accepts those hormones. Not everyone's body thrives on supplementing with hormones, because we're not replacing hormones. We're meant to do what we do, right? So I think that's a more interesting and more nuanced conversation, and it's one that I'm most definitely having in my corner of the world, but also with the women that I work with.
Yeah, I think I really like what you said about there's space for everybody in this conversation, right? Because there's people that are 100% on the science-based side, and there's people that are 100% on the spiritual-based side. And then there's people like you that probably lands somewhere right in the middle. And I don't think that any perspective is truly wrong. I think that it's always wise for us to come into every conversation open-minded, believing that the information that I have could be wrong and I'm open to learning that I'm wrong. And I think that's where we make the most progress, is when we're just radically open-minded. So with you landing right in the middle of spiritual and science-based, what does that look like? How is life for you, and how does that conversation go to the people in your circles?
So it's interesting. It kind of depends on the person. But if I'm speaking about it from my perspective of either teaching or how it feels to me, the first thing I'll say is that so I speak a lot of different languages. I speak the language of Western science. I speak the language of traditional Chinese medicine. I speak the language of Ayurveda. I speak the language of ancient kind of hills of Appalachia and herbalism. Like I have a little bit of all of that in the way that I speak and how I really support women and women's health and the evolution of women's health, the trajectory of women's health. So I guess the way how that translates into how I fall in the middle is that I think that a woman's body is fluid. I think that the way that we're meant to care and cultivate not only an internal environment, but our external environment, I think that fluidity is really important. And I find science to be fluid in only certain ways. And I find spiritual, psychic, metaphysical, personal development to only be fluid in other more opposite ways. And so when you bring those two together, you're actually working with not only the vessel, but you're working with the soul. And I think as human beings, I mean, this is of course my belief system, but I think souls line up at the door to have the opportunity to experience the human, very sensation, very senses driven aspect. And then there's lessons to be learned and karma to be, examined and worked through. And then I think there's generational and ancestral things to be, worked through and developed and maybe even healed if one's has that in them. And so I think how does that correspond with the physiology is I think that, for example, I'll give you an example of myself. I was raised by a woman who I call mother, and I'm also adopted. So I have a birth mother and I have the mother who raised me. And I feel very much that the woman who raised me, she is in my blood, the way she moved, the way she spoke, the way she thought, the way she would, touch me when I was slumped over because she wanted me to stand up straight. Like she's in my musculature.
Yeah.
But my birth mother very much runs through my blood. Like her blood is my blood is her blood. And so there's an aspect of her that runs through me, even though I've never met her, I've never talked to her, I have no experience of her. She is part of me. So when I work on myself, when I do healings on myself, when I work with other people who have maybe lost a child or had an abortion or had a parent or an animal that they've lost, like we're working with everything that is part of them. We're working with their emotions, we're working with their beliefs, we're working with how they've actually transitioned through that experience, and we're trying to release that in the physical body through the energetic realm. So that's kind of how it lands for both.
I love that. And so, how do you do that? How do you release any or all of that throughout the body?
If I could really put that into a few sentences, wouldn't I win a
Good
Nobel
challenge, huh?
something? Or yeah, exactly. It's like that's the $65 million question. I mean, here's what I know for sure. So I had an experience, my first child, I was pregnant with my first child. I went into labor, I go to the hospital. It starts to go kind of intense quickly. I started hemorrhaging. I ended up having an emergency C-section. It was, we were both on the verge of not making it. Luckily, I made it, he made it, everything is well and good. But in the process of going through an emergency C-section, because my placenta was abrupting, and so I was hemorrhaging and his heartbeat was going,
Yeah.
stopping at times and then revving back up. He has very strong life force energy, as do I. I offered myself, like I felt an angelic presence, and I offered myself I said, save him and take me. And it was a very strong, like, no, that's not what's going to happen. And in that moment, I think think that I was initiated or something within me was initiated. Now, we've all heard a great like near-death experience, and here I am. I've got my own version of that.
Yeah.
But from that moment on, I had a knowing about me, which for 10 years I thought was like the mother's instinct, but I had a very strong knowing of things that weren't told to me, or that I shouldn't necessarily know. And fast forward to roughly 5 years ago, when I was working with a woman, and had her some hormone testing in front of me. And I was looking at it, and things started to pop up through this. And this was, like right before COVID. And I was asking her questions, because part of my work is I get information through me. It's just like a knowing that drops in.
Intuition.
Well, here's the thing. It doesn't come from my body, and my intuition comes from my body.
Okay.
It's intuitive in the sense that no one's told me, and I haven't read it, and it's not written, but it's more like it drops in front of me. And that's how I know the difference when I am, quote unquote, channeling for myself or working with something that is mine or someone in my family, versus when I'm working with a woman who I don't know and have never met and know nothing about them. When something comes through, it's a matter of opening up the mind and allowing the information to work through you. So I have no attachment to the information. Like the questions mean nothing to me. It would be as though you and I were getting in a fight, and I speak Czech and you speak Russian.
Yeah.
And we could be screaming obscenities at each other, but we have no attachment to the words. That's how it feels when it comes through me. And so when I'm working with someone, like, I am listening to their symptoms. I'm watching their face. I'm watching and listening to their inflection and all of the regular human cues that we use our nervous system to do, right? They're inherent, they're innate, they're wired within us. But then I have this other ability to receive questions, knowledge, information, and then all of a sudden the picture, it's like a movie, is played in front of me, and I understand the steps. One of my, I would say, superpowers is to be able to talk to someone for 15, 20, 30 minutes, and then based on what they've said, based on what's come through, and based on what their body is telling me, and I don't even know how to describe that, but it's really about just intense sensations. Like sometimes an organ will come through. Like I was doing a body whisper session last week, and a woman's spleen, like I asked her, I said, has your spleen been operated on? Do you have your spleen or not? She's like, no, I have it, but it's interesting you ask, because I always have, unusual levels. And I was talking to her about what those levels mean and what her body's trying to communicate. So it sounds a bit wonky, it sounds a bit off, but it's a combination of like, what is this person's actual experience with this body? What do they also want to achieve? So like, as I'm sure you have women that come to you and they're like, I want to look like blank. And you look at them and you say, okay, are you ready for this? Because to get from where you are to where you want to be, that's probably a 2-year experience. And most people, not all people, but I would say the vast majority of people want something that they don't actually have the capacity to hold for that amount of time. And so like you, I'm sure my job is to hear what they're saying, see what they're available for, and then try to communicate through what the body's available and able to do at this moment, and give them that sequence of events to get them to somewhere, maybe not the ultimate place, but a place where they feel a difference in their body. And I can tell you with 100% certainty that nothing, no physical ailment ever comes without a spiritual component, meaning the body holds the energy in a certain particular way, or stagnates energy in a particular way, so as to create movement in the body that then creates a pain or a sensation or a lack of clarity. And that's what brings you to the place where you have to deal with that. And as you're dealing with that, the dealing with that becomes the medicine of the ailment. So it's as though I always say to people who come to me, I work with a lot of people with chronic disease. I work with a lot of women who want to titrate off medication. And I say, I need you to know that whatever disease you've been labeled with, or whatever condition, your medicine for healing that is encapsulated in that condition. So when we unpack, when we unfurl that condition, you will understand the steps and stages. And when you shift your perspective and you shift your belief, you will change the way you feel.
That's amazing. Have you ever heard of or read the book, The Body Keeps the Score?
Of course. Of course. Like, who hasn't read that book?
I think a lot of people. But
Yeah.
That is what came to mind really quickly when you said that, because you're right. We just harness so much inside of us. That is our thoughts, our spirit, anything like that. And I mean, handling it will change everything. I love
Everything.
that. Wow. So I saw on your social media that you talked about healing people in many different ways, but one of them is addressing how they think. And I think that's kind of relative to this conversation, right? If we can change how someone thinks, we can change a lot inside their day-to-day life, what they become, the trajectory of their life. Can you kind of go into that a little bit more?
Sure. So I think of the mental and the emotional as like two different quadrants, if you will, or two different aspects, two different layers of the body. So as young people, in one of the ways that I look and work with the body is I use the chakra system. So the seven main chakras that align the spine.
Hmm.
And within these particular areas of the body it's an energy center and there are plexes of nerves. There's an endocrine gland in each one of them. And so we're always working with these two aspects of the body all the time. We're working with the physical, like the things that we can hold and operate on, and we can create a scientific hypothesis to, and even medicate and change, the trajectory of how it works or how it functions. And then we're also working with how the energy arranges itself and how it's kept there. So at any given time, we're working with both. And within that also comes experiences in life. So the chakras sort of align and mature from the bottom up. So the root chakra develops first, and it's very much grounded in our distinct relationship to how we were loved and cared for, and how we believe that we deserve love, and how we got love, and how we were cared for. So as not to be, kicked out of the tribe and then left to die, because of course, if we're not part of something, we can't fend for ourselves at that age. So, and within that area, obviously within the root chakra lies the endocrine gland of the adrenal glands, and also the legs, the hips, the feet. So we have a very distinct connection to the earth. We have a very distinct connection to the heartbeat, to the rhythm of the earth, which very much mirrors the rhythm of the mother, of being in the womb, of being connected and being cared for by the mother. So we have these parallels that are really powerful. And one of the ways that I think is really beautiful to work with a woman's body in that respect is to help her see that she is both energetic and physical. There were a couple of days in my life where, this is kind of how adoption happened in the early 70s when I was born. My mother birthed me, and then to my knowledge, she never saw me again. And I was in several foster homes until my adopted mother received me after a couple of days. And within those couple of days, there was a bond that was severed in my energy. And I was quote unquote taken from one, and not yet received by the other one that would care for me and, show me essentially what love and safety felt like. So I have this very distinct break. And so for the majority of my adult life, I always am working with the feelings of being left out, feeling abandoned. And I don't mean abandoned in the capital A. I mean abandoned in like, oh, I'm not part of that group, or
Yeah.
oh, that hurt the way they said that, when in reality that person was joking and just had a dry sense of humor. But that's a thing that I'm always working on. That's a perception. So that's my human perception of how a situation goes. That perception, if I think it over and over again, creates a belief.
Yeah.
And the belief is what I hold in my body. The belief is what I create, and it basically rocks my perception of how my world orbits. And so when I talk about thoughts, what I mean by changing someone's thought is when we rearrange the thought, we create a different belief. And when we create a different belief, we release the hold that the energy has. And it almost always brings us back to an aspect of ourselves that feels or has the potential to feel fragmented, right? We talk about fragmentation. And so what I work with women, and I think most women would probably say that's not what I work on, but one of the big things is really bringing all of those different fragments after having lived on this planet for 40 or 50 or 60 some odd years. We're wanting to bring those fragments back in and feel more whole, feel more complete. And we have the ability to do that because all these chakras are mature, locked in, fired up, and ready to go. And we don't have these hormones that are keeping us very kind of like focused and particularly driven towards one outcome, and that is growing and sustaining the human race.
Wow, that's great.
And that's how I bring it all together, right? Like that's how it all kind of works together. The hormones, the thoughts, the energy, the chakras.
Yeah, I love that. And one thing you mentioned there that really stuck out to me, because we've been talking about this a lot with my community, is people's perceptions, right? You and me can be standing right next to each other and watch the same exact thing happen. And our realities of what actually happened are completely different, right? Is that something that you talk about within your group programming or your coaching or?
All the time.
Yeah.
All the time.
And so how do you go about that? How do you start to, because I don't think many people realize it or actively think about it, but how do you start to know that everyone's living a different reality, basically, and how can that help you?
Well, the way I know is that we're all human beings. We're all the center of our own attention, as we should. We're the center of our movie, right? So because we are self-centered and we kind of have to be in order to quote unquote survive, we're all centered around situation, our own life. And of course, we have other people that come and go, and we have children, we have spouse, we have partners, we have whatever. And of course, all those people are important, but inherently, we can't care more about someone else than we care about ourselves. So we should be self-centered. We should care for self. We should cultivate self in a really powerful way, because the more self-cultivated we are in every way, whether we're, cultivating spirit within self, whether we're cultivating a healthy mindset, a healthy way of eating, a healthy way of sleeping, like ways that serve self, we're serving the vessel that houses the soul. And the more that we connect to our soul, the more we quote unquote ascend or expand or learn or heal. And then that journey then can skyrocket, because you've met somebody, I'm sure. I mean, I certainly have, and I've had this circumstance in my own life where I'm shown the agent, right, within my own life that shows me the thing I need to heal. It's like a giant mirror. It's usually very uncomfortable, and it's very easy for me to blame someone else, but it's really about me. And then I disown it, or I make it about someone else. And then a year later, a little bit more intense agent comes around and is like, no, you need to learn this lesson. And I still don't learn the lesson. And then number 3 comes around 5 years later, and I'm like, why is this still happening? Why am I still experiencing this? And it's because my perception of what I'm here to do and what I need to work through, what I need to rearrange, what am I believing about the situation, the person, or myself that's preventing me from learning the lesson, which is preventing me from feeling less fragmented and more whole. And so I would say that's how I know, is if someone comes to me and says, I just feel like I have this situation and it just keeps happening over and over. It's a guy. I'm always attracted to this kind of guy, and I can never find someone that feels like a life partner. Or, no matter how many times we have the same argument, my husband of 25 years, no matter how many times, this is like a woman saying this to me, no matter how many times I have the same argument, never, we argue about the same thing and we never get anywhere. It's because they're both just in their own little world, in their own movie, just being centered on a way that is serving them. And that serfdom, right? Being a slave to that belief makes it such that they cannot see another perspective. They cannot see how that belief is creating that reality for them.
It's almost like just like being massively closed-minded. Yeah, that's great. So you've talked a couple of times about how you help these women, 40, 50, 60, transform massively internally, which is probably creating massive external change as well. Where do they do that? Like, how do you help these women? Do you have a program? What does that look like?
So I do. I have a membership where we work in a group form. That's called the Dome. And so that is where we come together. It's like a circle. We come in circle and we hold space and support. So I run the group. So, that's there. And we work on both the science and the spirit. And there's a one-on-one component to that. And what's really beautiful about this group, and I have to say this, is like the reason, like all of the branding and the reason that it's called the Dome is because I really feel like the auric field is like our protective dome. And we work on various aspects of our energetic body, but also our physical body. And so within the dome, there are, of course, it's a lot of self-study. So I've recorded a lot of things that we, use and go back and refer to. It's courses, trainings, master classes, and meditations, a lot of guided meditation. Then we also have a group call. And on the group call, we come together once a month, and I always bring a theme and then hold space for other women to comment or to bring something up. And then what usually ends up happening is in a group setting, and I think this is something that's sort of missed for a lot of people, is that sometimes in a group setting, if you don't feel like being in the hot seat, the people who come in group, in circle together, there's always a higher purpose, not only for the individual, but for the group. And so every person that comes has an aspect of them that is going to be healing to other people in other areas that they can't even imagine. But then you also learn how to, and I think this is a really important aspect, especially for the Gen X situation, is that we're really learning how to hold space for others without trying to tell somebody how to do it, and without kind of leaning back and being like, ooh, that's not mine. It's that real kind of like relationship with being able to hold space with the this and that, right? This is heavy and it's really uncomfortable and it's not mine. And that, I think that ability to do that makes us better partners, makes us better parents, makes us, more successful in our passion work or in our careers. And I think it makes for a better world, honestly. So that's like the group setting. And then of course I do one-on-one work and one-on-one healing, which is really sort of the bedrock of my practice. I don't produce a lot of courses. I'm not like a course creation queen kind of thing. I'm really more of working one-on-one and getting to know someone, and then, following them through, leading them through some major stuff. And then they move on.
That's great. I love it. Deeper, not wider. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Michelle. If anybody wants to go and find out about the two last things that you kind of offered us, or they just want to go spend time on social media, where can they find you?
So I'm on Facebook, Michelle Aspinwall. I'm on Instagram, Michelle E. Aspinwall, and then TikTok as The Body Whisperer.
I love it. Awesome.
Yeah,
Michelle,
thank you.
thank you again.